Let's date forever. Here's your weekly dose of relationship fuel with Sammy and Nathan Yeager. Hello and welcome to Date Forever. In this week's episode, we're chatting about creating a relationship vision, maintaining independence and solo time as a wife and mother, learning to speak the love language of physical touch, M's reinvention from addiction to thriving, reinventing life from scratch again and again, and managing anxiety and ADHD. But before we dive into that, Sammy, what's been fueling you up this week?
It's more than this week. It's like this month. The month of March is one of my favorite months of the year. Not just because it's birthday month, but because Mardi Gras festival in Sydney generally lands in March.
Yep.
Yes, it is my birthday. It's also International Women's Day. It's also Adelaide Fringe Festival month, which is our home city.
Mad March.
March. So there's been lots of things that have been fueling me up in the last little while, which is really beautiful. We've just fresh off of the back of a visit to our home city of Adelaide, where we had lots of delicious quality time with friends and family, and we celebrated some milestone birthdays and spent some time with some little bubbas who are new, which was really, really beautiful and fueled me up a lot. But so did International Women's Day. I got to go to a really beautiful lunch hosted by Business Chicks and listen to a few speakers sharing a little bit about what they're working on and how we're making a difference and celebrating the progress that we're making with global goal number 5 of gender equality. So, yeah, there's a few things that's been fueling me up lately. What about you, Nath?
Yeah, I'm very similar as well. We've been doing a lot this month. It has been a bit of a mad March for us. And International Women's Day fueled me up as well. I attended a breakfast where we had an all-Indigenous women's panel, which was really, really informative and just really great to be part of, I guess, that breakfast and that community. But the other thing in amongst all of our mad Marchness is that I did also have a really busy work month with a few key people from my team on leave, and so I was kind of holding the reins.
Bigger boss than usual.
Yeah, that's it. So I was just really proud of myself and how I managed, I guess, during that real busy sort of surge period, I guess. And now I've got a full team back on deck. So I'm just really appreciative of the team that I've kind of curated at work. So that's been fueling me up too.
I think the other really big thing that has fueled me up is that we are full steam ahead on planning our big trip for later in the year, booking flights and doing research and getting tickets and stuff. So having something that big to look forward to is really fueling me up too. So European summer, here we come.
But now let's dive into this week's app.
Today we've got MG joining us. She's a marketing and mindset coach with a healthy obsession with AI. She's a best-selling author, speaker, and ADHD entrepreneur. With many things on the go at once, M juggles motherhood, marriage, and business on the daily. She's passionate about keeping it real, and that's why we've got her on the show today. Welcome to the show, Em.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Excited to have you here. And I feel like this has been a long time coming because we've been hanging out for a little while. So we touched on it a little bit in your intro about some of the things we're going to chat about today, but really I want to dig into your relationship with yourself because you've got some really cool habits and practices that you've got that keep your relationship with you fueled up. So do you just want to maybe like set the scene? Like, what's your life like?
What's my life like? Wow, it's a big question, right? So my life is something that I've set up really intentionally, but that wasn't by mistake. It was, of course, because it was intentionally, but it was because of going through so much in my younger years and then realizing that if I didn't do something intentionally in my life and create my life in a way that really worked for me and my purpose, then I was probably not going to end up in a very good place. Like 10 years ago, I was essentially a drug addict to alcohol and prescription drugs, and I was not in a good place mentally. And there was a lot of reasons for that, but I could blame my past or I could choose to change my future. And instead of blaming my past and continuing down that route, I, turned things around. I was already with my husband. He wasn't my husband at the time, but he saw me at my worst. and obviously accepted me at my worst. And we have consistently just continued to go, what do we want in life? And uprooted and changed that on a regular basis, because probably me more than him, I change a lot. I'm constantly, looking for the next thing that I want to do, the next goal I want to achieve. And so we live a life now. We live on the beach in WA in Perth. We've got 2 beautiful daughters and a little dog. And he has got a government job that he doesn't completely love, but it serves his purpose in impact at the moment. Long term, I don't think he'll be there, but I have more freedom and flexibility, and that works really well. We've got a bit of that yin and yang in our relationship. We're showing our children different ways of doing things, because he's, got this traditional role, whereas the way I do things is not traditional. And I spend a lot of time still now as a mother doing the things that I loved to do before I was a mother, and that's also been a really intentional part of my life as well.
Yeah, amazing. So, like you mentioned, like the 10 years ago, you kind of had this realization that you didn't want to keep going the way that you were doing. And I guess that's kind of the first step to identifying and creating change. But what did that process kind of look like for you to go, all right, I know that what I'm doing now is not what I want to keep doing, but what do I actually want to do? What do I want my life to look like, and how do I even start taking the first step to get in that right direction?
Yeah, so it started with a full breakdown, to be honest. It was me addicted to sleeping pills and alcohol, and needing to get on a plane to go home to my parents and stay with them while I went on a low dose of anxiety medication. But it was, your SSRIs that take a few weeks and you go down. I don't even remember those few weeks. It was like just dark. And I remember one morning waking up like paralyzed on the floor. I was face down. I couldn't move. But I could think. And I just remember thinking, fuck, this is not good. It was one of those moments where you're just like, there's a pathway, and I've got to choose which pathway that I'm going to take. So the next day, and now I'm saying this, it was definitely more than 10 years ago, because I ordered CDs. So it was probably more like, it was before we were married. We're married 10 years. It was probably 14 years ago. 14 years ago. Time goes so quickly. Like,
Yeah.
You guys are pretty much the same age as me. And I'm like, the years just morph. I ordered these Holysync CDs. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it was like the OG binaural beats that you could order on these CDs. I got them from America. They sent them over and I played them. I had the CD thing in the laptop and I would sit there. I had time back then to meditate for an hour, and I practiced meditating for an hour every single day. And it did make me feel quite good. I felt like it was a step in the right direction. And I think it was just kind of one step at a time making changes. Things changed quite quickly, having medication, and also, putting into practice the other things that I was doing in order to look after myself. But honestly, the biggest thing was that decision, that moment of making that decision. I choose to go in this direction, and I can have better, and I deserve better. And I don't know where that comes from. Like, I think it's just always been, I've always had like a determined mindset. And no matter what curveballs life throws at me, I will make a decision to just go, that's okay. I can choose my path from here.
And what was the climate of your like romantic relationship at that time? Like, because obviously we know it has a happy ending because you've ended up married with beautiful children. But what was it like at the time when you were in the thick of it in your relationship with yourself?
Yeah, it was a bit messy. I remember I had a car accident, of course, because all of these things happen, right? I had a car accident around that time as well, and all of the things came to the surface. And my then boyfriend, now husband, he was there to help me through that, which really made me believe that I was supported, whereas I hadn't felt supported before. And I think I needed that external validation first. And then I was able to go inward because I felt like I had someone holding space for me. I felt like I was supported. My mum as well, went and stayed with her. I had that external validation. And I think a lot in personal development, we talk about how, we shouldn't be seeking external validation. But sometimes when you're in that place, when you're so deep down in your own shit, that is the first thing you need. And sometimes we push it away. But my relationship with myself at that point was definitely not good. I did not like myself. I felt like I should be better, and that I should just be able, I shoulded on myself a lot, right? I should be able to cope with this. Other people can do this. Why can't I do that? And so there was a lot of shoulding. But at the same time, I think the shadow side of that was that I wanted to prove it to myself. And that came out, and that was what helped me take those first steps to go, well, I want to prove myself wrong here, because I'm kind of a stubborn bitch in that way. I'm like, who can I prove wrong?
Hey, we love a bit of revenge success. So, Em, you went home to mum and dad, quite literally sobered up, and then what happened from there? I assume that maybe there was a job or some career stuff in there that you had to end a chapter, start a new chapter. Like, tell us a little bit about what happened next. How did you move from that default to design?
Yeah, I moved like 3,000 kilometers away, in the same state, because, WA is huge. So I was living, where I am now, kind of southern WA. I knew the town that I was living in was not, like, it was a very small town. There was a lot of alcoholism, and it wasn't a good place for me to be. So I moved. My now hubby and I, we actually had a long distance relationship for that year, which was a challenge in itself. But it also, I think, gave me the space to really discover who I was without it just being, building up who I am with him. And then he ended up coming up and working with me in that location as well for 2 years. That was where we ended up getting engaged, and obviously then got married. There were still times, I think, not long after we got married. It was when I got pregnant. I struggled a lot with prenatal depression, which a lot of people don't talk about. People talk about postnatal depression. They don't talk about prenatal depression. I had come off medication to get pregnant because I wanted to not have that in my body while I was growing a baby. But that turned out, it showed me that there was still a lot more inner work to do, right? So I had to do more inner work after that to really understand better where that anxiety was coming from, where the anger was coming from. Lo and behold, now we're 10 years down the track, I've been diagnosed with ADHD. So all of the anxiety actually makes so much more sense because it was undiagnosed, untreated ADHD. And now I have ADHD medication. I don't use anxiety medication, and I've never been able to sleep better. It's so funny. I take stimulants and I sleep better than I ever have in my life. And sleep has such a profound effect on, our mental health in general. But that was one of the biggest issues I've had for my entire life, was the anxiety that I felt that led to insomnia. That was like this constant vicious cycle. I've had to go through a lot of moments and steps along the way to get to this point, and there's going to be more to come. But I think getting that ADHD diagnosis has actually been very, very pivotal. I wrote a whole book about anxiety, and now I have to write a new book.
To give the book a plug, because it is a bestseller.
Yeah, it is a bestseller, and it's great still. There's nothing wrong with this book. It's Uncertain to Unstoppable. I now want to change the name because ChatGPT is ruining every word starting with unleash. You can't use it anymore because ChatGPT uses it. But anyway, Uncertain to Unstoppable, it is a personal development book about my story up until the point that I knew that I had ADHD. So it's about anxiety, and because you have that uncertainty when you're anxious, and it stops us from taking action. And so it's all of the tools that I have practiced in order to become unstoppable despite feeling anxiety. And now I'm even more fucking unstoppable. So
because it's given you a new lens to look at yourself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And realizing that yeah, sure, everyone feels anxiety, and that's just a part of life. I've got no problem with feeling anxiety, but when you've spent years, 10 years doing the work to try and like manage the anxiety, and then all of a sudden you get this bomb drop, like, oh, it's not anxiety, it's ADHD unmanaged causing anxiety. And then you manage the ADHD and all of a sudden no anxiety.
So I know that this is actually quite common, that particularly women of a certain age and generation like totally overlooked for ADHD diagnosis. So if no one's ever heard of this, or an adult being diagnosed with it, can you tell us a little bit about the process? Because I know it's not one visit to a GP. It's pretty extensive, right? Right.
Well, you know what? I actually think it needs to be more extensive. It's extensive in the fact that it takes a long time because our medical system is struggling hugely, and unfortunately, it's also really expensive. And so for me, I'm kind of like grateful that I'm privileged, but I also see there's a lot of people struggling. And for me to get a diagnosis cost me $1,500, and a lot of people can't afford to do that. So I had to see a psychiatrist. I'm pretty sure it's the same across Australia. And the reason you see a psychiatrist is because they are the ones that can prescribe medication. I only had to see her once in order to get a diagnosis, plus a couple of like questionnaires that were sent to people that, you know, spend time with me so they could kind of do an evaluation on how I show up in my day-to-day life. But honestly, I didn't learn anything from the psychiatrist that I hadn't already researched in my hyperfocus that I have. You know, like I had read, there's a great book called ADHD 2.0. I've also read all of Gabor Mate's books around this, Scattered Minds, for example, because I love his holistic approach to thinking about, you know, like why is ADHD showing up more frequently now, or is it just that there's more diagnosis because they were missed? Like he's got a very well-rounded approach to it as well. Nutrition makes such a big difference, and I think that's something needs to be touched on. But it is a process mainly because it takes so long. But I think the best thing to do is get yourself on a list. If you think this is something you want to do, get yourself on a list to see a psychiatrist. But in the meantime, do all of your own research because there's so much out there, and don't just do the research on like TikTok or, you know, Instagram reels, because, you know, I used to think ADHD was actually a mental illness, truly. And when I was a teacher early on in the piece, I had learned nothing about ADHD and I just thought it was naughty little boys, truly. Yeah. And you know, there is so many ways to discuss ADHD, but I think it's a personal journey. And my personal journey was initially rejecting the idea of medication because I thought, like, it doesn't make sense to take stimulants. But then I was like, well, why don't I try it, see what happens? And literally the first day I tried it, I was like, wow, this is what clarity feels like. I had never felt that level of clarity before. I'm really grateful. I'm so grateful for it.
Thank you for sharing that journey, Em. And I actually have a couple of other friends who have had similar experience where they're like, oh my gosh, I can hear one thought, not 10,000 thoughts at once. And it's like, yeah, and a really life-changing experienced even within your own body. So your relationship with yourself has been evolving, but I'd love to know, like, what are some of the habits and practices that you've got now to keep your relationship with yourself fueled up?
The first one always is exercise, movement. Like, it's my number one. It always has been. And it's funny because it's evolved so much over time. I rejected sport. I hated sport growing up because I grew up in New Zealand in a predominantly Maori community. They're all so freaking good at sport that, like, I would just be destroyed. So I didn't do any team sport. I did like, solo things or dancing or swimming or something so that I didn't like have to let the team down. Again, that's me like wanting to prove myself. But if I can't prove myself in the team, then I'm just not going to do it. And now, like, that is a daily thing. It doesn't matter whether it's a walk, whether it's yoga, whether it's boxing. I love all of it. Whether it's weights, I have to move. That is my number one. And it's probably the only thing that is consistent every single day, to be quite honest. I have, I've got multiple businesses. I have 2 kids. I'm not going to meditate and journal every day. I actually find it quite hard to meditate, as you can imagine, with a very busy mind. That doesn't mean I won't do it, but the thought of trying to do it every day makes me want to rip my eyeballs out. So I don't.
Yep.
Journaling I do when I have, you know how you have those things that happen. I've got one right now that's happening with my daughter at school, and I'm just like, all I want to do is call someone and vent and be like, rah, I'm so angry about it. So I use my journal to like vent my shit. And that might not be daily, but it's when I have, or I might have, something that's happening with my business that's not going well, and I just vent it out so that I don't have to just dump that on my husband or dump it on a friend. And sometimes, of course, we vent to our partner and our friend, but sometimes I know I don't actually need to do that. I just need to get it out of my system. So journaling is definitely a strategy, but it's not daily. And one that's been really powerful for me recently that I've made more of a habit is breath work, because I've done a lot of mindset work, and, that's kind of like trying to think differently, and it's very masculine and it's very in your head. But I know that I'm naturally in my head. So if I use breath work, I can get more into my body, and I feel so much better for it, that somatic release. So that is kind of like, I've always had my breath, and I always knew with anxiety, and I knew the box breath, I knew all of that stuff. But that kind of holotropic trauma release breath work every couple of weeks has been absolutely brilliant for just releasing stored crap in my body, which I love right now.
Yeah, amazing. And I know that you've also got a practice about the time that you spend away from your family. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because you're fresh off the back of one.
Yeah, I am. I just got back from 12 days in Sri Lanka on my own. And so, I've got an 8-year-old, I have a 6-year-old, I have a dog, I have a husband. My husband works a demanding role, and I, went away for 12 days. It's not the first time. I've done it a lot. I mean, the first year of my children's lives was probably the only time that I haven't done that, because, breastfeeding is basically the only reason. Is if my boobs are in another country, they can't do that thing. Once they were off the boob, I was like, what's my next trip? Because I have been an avid traveler since forever. We didn't have really any money to do any traveling when I was growing up. But as soon as I was 18, I actually used the money that I was getting from the government to help me with university to go on my first trip when I was 18. And that was to Fiji for 2 weeks on my own, which no one goes to Fiji on their own. Everyone goes for a girls' trip or a romantic week. So there's this 18-year-old plodding around the islands of Fiji. Had an absolute ball. Southeast Asia, Europe, America. Obviously, I ended up in Australia through all of those travels as well. But when I had kids, it was a really conscious decision to go, my life doesn't end here in terms of the adventures. I want my kids to go on some of those adventures, but I also don't, because I want to go and explore them without thinking, what can we do that the kids will like to do? I don't want to do that all the time. And so I go away, and I honestly have found that it helps my kids to thrive, because they get to be with their dad in that time without me having my input about shit. They have fun dad time. They get to eat pasta and burgers every night. They don't have me overlooking them. They get to see how they thrive without needing me. And that's so important for their independence. They also will miss me, for sure. Yes, I have tearful conversations with them, but that's okay. They're allowed to feel sad. They're allowed to miss me. I miss them too. And then when I come back and we come back together, it's so special, because we have missed each other, and we've got things to share, and things have happened that, we can share photos and we can share memories. And, from that perspective of, oh, guess what, mum, as opposed to, oh, she already knows. There's so much benefit to it, not just to them in that way, but also the benefit is that they get a mum whose cup is filled, and that is something that actually a lot of kids are missing out on. As so many mums are doing everything for their kids and nothing for themselves, you don't actually show up as your best self for your kids. So what's the point? And my relationship, like with hubby, yes, there's times where he's like, oh, she's going away again. Like, I'll be completely frank. I do ask, we do have a conversation about it, but I think he knows now that once I've made up my mind that I'm going somewhere, it's more of a negotiation about when than whether it's happening or not. It's not asking for permission. It's going, this is something I want to do. How can we make it work? And also, I encourage him to do the same. It's just that he has a job that doesn't allow him to do it as much, right? So he does do it occasionally, but obviously not as much. But, I come back and we've missed each other. We've been married for 10 years this year, and we don't miss each other unless one of us goes away. Like, I don't miss him when he goes to work because, like, we've been together forever. So I think that it's really good for our relationship, and we have great sex when I come back too, because we haven't been in each other's energy for a while. It's like, oh, hey.
I love all of this, Em. This is something that Nathan and I do as well. And it was interesting that you were saying like that your first solo trip was to Fiji. My first solo trip overseas on my own was to Vietnam. I spent 3 months, and it really helped me shape a lot of my values and learn to trust myself. And I, just had to you have to figure stuff out. And it was also the first time that Nathan and I were long distance and apart for a period of time, and we'd already been together for, I don't know, probably 6 or 7 years at that point. So I found it was really good for our relationship, and it's something that we've done quite a few times since then too. And we did make a point of going like girls trip, guys trip every year as well. I normally take more than one.
You normally do, yeah.
The extrovert.
Whereas maybe we're in a similar boat that I've got the full-time job that, yeah.
I was going to say, same situation, because, you've got the full-time job. Sammy's got a little bit more flexibility. And, if there becomes any kind of, what's the right word? I'm thinking about like, your situation. And as long as you're able to communicate, this is what I'm doing and this is what I want to do and this is what we're able to do with our current context. That's the most important thing, as long as you can communicate about it. I know everyone says communication is the key to all relationships, but it is.
Yeah. So, Em, I would love to hear a little bit about your relationship vision, because I know that the two of you are pretty intentional about how you're designing life, and you recently made, a pretty big change for your family. So I'd love to know, like, what's that process look like for you? Do you involve the kids? Tell us about it.
So it's interesting because I know I shared about the relationship vision before we hit record, but this is not something we've intentionally done before. It's only something we just recently intentionally did because we went to like a day retreat. In our 7th year of marriage, this is a few years ago, we had a year of, I guess it was a relationship vision. We intentionally spent that year. It was one of our goals to commit to our relationship. We had, I guess, a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old at the time. And the 5 years leading up to that, when you've got young kids, you just have no time for each other, or you haven't made time for each other. And so at that point, and the whole 7-year itch thing that people talk about, we were like, right, let's use this year to intentionally work on both ourselves, but our relationship. And it was the first time my husband actually did like a group coaching program for 4 months in a container with other men. And, he learned a lot of the things that I had learned about, personal development. And then we had this common language of how we communicate with each other, how we explain our feelings without blaming and that kind of thing. So that was really cool, a few years ago now. And then last year we uprooted our lives. We've actually uprooted our lives a lot. I think we've lived in over 10 houses together. We're pro movers, but of course, we have children. When we first did a whole lot of moving, we didn't have children. We want to create that stability for them. And we'd lived in the country for, 9 years, and then we're moving to the city. So that's a big change. Like, you've got the rural, the country lifestyle, very different to the city lifestyle, even though if you're in Sydney, you might not even consider Perth a city. We knew that we were ready for this next level in our own personal lives, him professionally, me in my business. We also knew for the kids, like, there's more opportunities for them. My eldest daughter is quite artistic. there's more sports stuff, in country towns. So we knew something needed to change. And it's funny because the same pattern happens in our relationship in our lives, and it's happened many, many, many times now, and it will probably continue to happen. Once we've made up our mind that something's going to change, all of a sudden we manifest all the things for it to just fall into place. So we had a chat. We were like, maybe it's time to move to Perth. Like maybe we're ready for that. Maybe it'll be different to the last time we were there. We're in different places now and energetically. And then literally the next week there was a job that came up that Reese was like, I'm going to apply for this. If I get it, it would be amazing. And of course he got it. So we were moving. And it was a big move because the kids were older. They'd made friends. They, didn't want to leave their friends. And it has been hard this last year. My husband's not been loving his job. I've been thriving in my business. But, it's when you're thriving and your partner's not, you're like, it pulls you in different directions because you're like, I want to lean towards, all the things that are going well for me, but I also don't want to discount the fact that things aren't, going well for him and all that kind of thing. It's been a juggle. So then this year again, we're like, okay, 10 years married. Let's again make that commitment. This year, what are we doing to up level in our relationship? We ummed and ahed about doing one of these big, beautiful overseas trips for our 10-year anniversary, and we couldn't decide on anything. And we were kind of arguing about it. And I was like, why are we doing this? Why are we trying to make a trip out of it? I don't think either of us actually want to. And so we decided not to. We're like, let's just take the pressure off. Like, we don't need to go somewhere to celebrate our 10 years. We booked into this day retreat. And at the day retreat, we learned about a lot of things, to be honest, that we already, know about masculine and feminine energy, but it was just a great opportunity to kind of get together and have that time to really just focus on our relationship. And one of those things was to come up with a relationship vision of what, from this point forward, we want our lives to look like and want our relationship to look like. And that was really cool because I feel like we've now got a framework because, we've got given this framework at the retreat to look forward instead of getting sucked into all the crap from the past, which we quite often do in relationships, and design that and go, okay, what do you want? What do I want? What do we collectively want? What do our kids need? How does that all cross over? And what do we do to make this happen for everyone? And it was fun. Like, we had such a good time dreaming about it and doing the feminine, feeling into it energetically, and then the masculine structuring what that's going to look like. And so that's a commitment we've made to do at the beginning of every year because, like I said, it was fun. We got the kids to go with the in-laws or his parents and, made a day of it, and it was awesome.
Beautiful. Yeah. And get excited. Was there something new there that you're like, that's giving new energy?
You know what? It wasn't actually anything new because we've had the goal that we've had for a while, but we hadn't really revisited the goal. And the goal is for us to spend a full year in 2026 in New Zealand. And we've had that goal since 2019. And because, we spent 11 weeks pre-pandemic, luckily, in New Zealand. And then Reese was like, well, my next long service leave is in 2026, maybe we come here for a year and I can take my long service leave at half pay, which is, by the way, when I'm going to convince him to leave the education department.
If anyone's listening.
Because I'll be like, how good is this? I think they know. Anyway, just bringing that back to the surface and reigniting how excited we are about that and what that will mean and how we're going to set ourselves up so that we can enjoy that year rather than feel like, we're struggling because we're not earning enough money or whatever, having all of that set in place.
So, Em, I know you've mentioned goals a few times, and clearly it's important for you to have goals, and it's something that you or helps sort of drive some of the things that you want to do in life. But do you have a kind of goal-setting practice that either you do individually or you and your husband do together?
That's a really good question. I don't think I have anything really set in stone in terms of a structure for a goal-setting practice. Most of the time, if I think about how it comes about, is when I notice that sticking point in my life and I go, I'm not lit up right now.
Yeah.
And then it's a reflection process of thinking, why am I not lit up right now? What's missing? And then I set a goal. And I think it's similar for my husband. But again, he probably has his own way of doing things. But for us, every year from the first year after we got married, so on our first wedding anniversary, I created this book. In the book, we reflect on what's happened in the year that's been. And we take turns. So like each year, like the first year I did it because I created it, and then the second year he did it, and vice versa. But we do sit down together on our anniversary and we write out. And it's quite cool to reflect and go, wow, look at all the things we've done in a year. Look at all the things that have happened. Look at the holidays we've been on. Look at the people that have visited us, or the goals that we've set. And I think that in itself has been really cool for us to be able to use that, because goal setting starts with reflection, really. Yeah. It's like, where am I? Where do I want to be? So that is definitely a structure we have. And it's funny because the book's got 50 pages. So we're like, what happens after 50 years? Do we get a new book? We're up to 10 years now.
We're going to be totally AI living in a virtual reality by then. So maybe there'll be no books.
Yeah. But it's so nice to look back on as well and be like, oh my gosh, we're crazy. We do so much in a year.
Yeah, that's that thing, isn't it, that we kind of overestimate what we can do in a short period of time, but underestimate what we can achieve in like a long period of time, like a year. And it kind of reminds me of that quote, like I think it's a Tony Robbins quote where he says, like, if you did the things that you did at the beginning of your relationship, there would never be an end. So I like that you're having that opportunity to reflect and like, what did we do together this year? What did we achieve together? And I think something that I learned from Keith Abraham, who was guest number 1 on this podcast, was that couples really thrive when they have those shared common goals, not because of achieving them, but because they can see the progress that they're making together. And then it's from that progress that we really derive a lot of happiness and joy and pleasure. So I love that you've got that.
And it's going on the journey. It's the like almost the anticipation of the goal is even more exciting. Like when we get to New Zealand in 2026, we have lived this in our imaginations for 7 years already. So we've actually reaped the benefits of this goal before we've even got there, because, we're living it.
Yeah, and all those beautiful visualizations. So Emma, are there any other habits or practices that the two of you have to keep your marriage fueled up?
I think one of the most important things that we do now, after like a little bit of work, because we weren't doing this in the past, is kissing every day. And his highest love language is physical touch. Mine is a combination of words of affirmation and acts of service. And so he would go to kiss me and I'd be like, oh, we don't really need to kiss every day, do we? So this was some work I had to do that year of the 7 year where we were like, we're working on our relationship. And that's something that we now do, make sure we do every single day. And also hugging for at least 7 seconds. We'll just use all the, sevens here. Hugging for at least 7 seconds, because you just have that time. For me, it's the time to surrender into his body, because when he hugs me, I'm just like, I allow myself to just surrender, whereas I can be very naturally in my masculine and want to take control. Whereas when we have that embrace every day, it's before he goes to work, it's that opportunity for me to just be like, okay, I'm held, I'm safe, and have that space. 7 seconds, like it's a micro moment, but it is a habitual thing that we do every day. And we know if it doesn't happen, like it's really obvious. He'll go to walk out the door in the morning and he'll be like, have we hugged and kissed? And I'm like, I don't know. No, let's do it again.
I love that you're bringing this up, because this is such, like you said, it's a micro moment and habit. But Gottman Institute talk about this, just how vital and how important our partings and greetings are, and that real intentionality around it. Actively being present with your person and for 7 seconds or whatever it might be. But we're a very smoochy couple. We kiss a lot. We are a PDA couple. So, what did you do to work through that sort of blockage? Because I have other friends who are not touchy-feely and that like it's a thing for them as well. So I'd love to know, what did you do to like break the back of that and, lean in?
At first, to be honest, it was a little bit forced. When I first got a Thermomix, you know, it's a $2,000 machine. It's like, I better fucking use this thing. But I know, like, for example, one of my favorite things to cook is an Indian dal. I know how to cook that like the back of my hand in a frying pan. I don't need to use the Thermomix, but actually I'm going to use the Thermomix. I used it every single day for 30 days in at least for every recipe in at least one way. So even if it was just making the friggin' rice in the Thermomix, I would do it because then I got used to doing it and then it became a habit. So it's kind of like habit building. But at the same time, I can't remember what like kind of commitment I gave it, whether it was like a week or whatever. But I basically gave it a time commitment, and then I felt the difference. And when I felt the difference and I remember it so vividly because it was April. And I remember it being April because I know where we were. And it was like, this actually, I feel more connected to him right now than I have in years. And the only thing that has changed is this touch. And that landed. And when that landed, and I realized it's really easy. Like, it doesn't need to be a smoochy kiss. Our kids think it's hilarious when we smoochy kiss. That's what they call it. I think that's from Bluey.
Oh, yeah.
But, you know, it's still that interaction, the physical touch that is so easy to lose when you've been together for a while. Go to bed at different times. So we need to have that, you know, scheduled in time to have a kiss.
Yeah. Or the practice, the ritual, the habit around it.
It is really interesting though, because like, as Sammy kind of said, we do kiss a lot, but then occasionally we'll get to the end of the day and we'll be lying in bed and it's like, I don't reckon we've kissed today yet. And so that's kind of our reflection point for the day. It's like, have we actually had that moment of connection or not? So.
Yeah, and I think like the time that you most want to kiss your partner, or maybe this is my experience, the time that I most want to kiss you is immediately after I've kissed you. Like it's like a responsive desire, stacking thing. And also I think that once you've fallen out of habit of that physical touch, sometimes it can be implied that, if we have this kiss now, there's almost pressure that it's going to lead to some other kind of physical touch, like, and the pressure that comes around that. And then it's like, I want to avoid it more because then it's being insinuated that that's where we're going to go and I don't want to do that. And yeah, so it can become like a real barrier for a lot of couples. And I really appreciate you sharing really candidly about your experience and how you overcame it.
We definitely had that. Like that was one of the things that we worked through in that 7th year of marriage, because he was doing the 4 months of personal development in a group container, and he started to learn about, you know, how he would look at me for affirmation. And so if I didn't kiss him, he would feel rejected. And then if he felt rejected, you know, then he would want to kind of like push for more physical touch because he's like, now I need more affirmation. And so then I would withdraw because I'm like, he's only kissing me because he wants it to lead to sex. And it was like this push-pull situation that we got into this cycle. And I think knowing that the kiss and the hug every morning before he goes to work, he was going to work, right? So we weren't about to go and run up to the bedroom, but it was still the opportunity to have that physical touch. And then if there was physical touch at other points in the day, it didn't feel so kind of like random or jarring because we hadn't done it, you know, in such a long time. And it wasn't like, oh my God, he's just trying to get in my pants. It goes there more naturally when you're not so like, to physical touch, you know, and you've had it's like frequency. Just the more you add the frequency, the more natural it feels. And for me, not having physical touch really high on my, my love language, that's worked really well for me to meet him and him to meet me. Like we're meeting each other.
Yeah. I think one of the interesting things that I've learned about the love languages, is that when your partner's got one, we'll use physical touch because that's what we've been talking about, and that's Nate's as well, is that when there's the absence of that love language, it's not neutral. It actually has a detrimental effect. So same for you, if the words of affirmation, probably not writing a birthday card or a anniversary card would probably be a lot more hurtful and harmful for someone whose love language might have been gift. They might have been totally enthralled by the gift and not needed the words, or vice versa. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, because learning to speak our partner's love language when it's not our primary is one of the, I guess, a really key skill, right? It's a skill, especially, and it doesn't come naturally.
Well, because you've got to overcome your own shit in order to be like, I do want to do this for the person that I love.
Yeah.
And when I do this for the person that I love, that actually makes me feel really good too, because I know we feel more connected. And it's a win-win.
Yeah, but sometimes there is that, just whatever the uncomfortable bit is, isn't it? I appreciate that you sharing about your own journey with getting coaching and support, both individually and attending retreats and personal development things together. And that's one of the pillars of our relationship now, is since 2019, that's been a commitment of ours, that we'll go and do some immersive personal development experience together. Yeah, and it's been beautiful for us to grow in our personal development journey together and have that shared language piece, but then to also engage in coaching and group coaching and peer-led coaching and those kinds of things on our own journeys as well. So it's nice to hear that from you.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, Em, thank you so much for being here. To say thank you, we've provided a student in Indonesia with a week of classroom education. So that project is looked after by Friends of National Parks Foundation, and it's been made possible via our partnership with Buy One, Give One. So thank you so much for being here and making that possible.
Beautiful, thank you. And I love that you guys do that. I love, as you know, very heartfelt. And wanting to give back. So I appreciate you both for that.
Yeah. No worries. So if people want to connect with you or learn a little bit more about your story, how can they do that?
So probably the best way to connect with me is on Instagram, @thereal_MG. I'm sure you can put a link in the show notes. I'd love to hear from you. Flick me a message, a DM, and I love chatting. I love talking about pretty much anything. I'm a very open book, as you might have already been able to tell. And you can also go to my website, therealmg.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Em.
Thank you.
This episode of Date Forever has been brought to you by Sammy Yeager and the Fueled Up Life Lab. If you want to learn more, come on over to sammyyeager.com, where you can access stacks of resources to help you fuel up your life and relationship. If you've loved this episode, share it with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an ep. Thanks for joining us and adding fuel to your tank.